BetUS, America's favorite sportsbook and casino. Live betting and racebook. We're celebrating 30 years with a historic offer. A 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits. Plus 10% gambler's insurance. Get started today. BetUS, where the game begins.
What's up in War Eagle, everybody? You got Ike Jones back inside of LAUB Town, sponsored by BetUS.com, where the game begins. You can find the link if you want to go ahead and start placing some of these bets on all of the things going on right now during March. It's that time of year for college basketball. Y'all can get into it, betus.com. But we're here today to talk about Auburn versus South Carolina, the matchup inside of the SEC tournament. Let's get straight to it. Let's go into the town.
The Auburn Express.
You are now listening to The War Report LAUB Town Podcast. With your boy Ike Jones.
LAUB Town, you got Ike Jones in here. Auburn versus South Carolina set to take place. SEC tournament matchup. Auburn had the double bye. South Carolina coming off of the win versus Arkansas. And we're here to break down the matchup for you all. Hopefully everybody is ready to watch some good basketball. Let's get straight into it, though. The conversation is Auburn versus South Carolina. The head-to-head looks as follows. Auburn's got the edge in points scored per game. Lamont Paris had a great season here for South Carolina. He ends up being the SEC Coach of the Year, leading South Carolina, coaching South Carolina to 26-6 record on the season, and scoring almost 70, a little over 2 points per game. As far as points against, South Carolina is the better defensive team as far as scoring defense. 66.4 points per game. They're surrendering to Auburn's 68.5. Auburn shooting the ball a little bit better this season, 47.3. versus South Carolina's 44.1. Rebounding edge goes to Auburn at 38 rebounds per game to South Carolina's just south of 36. Assists per game goes to Auburn just above 18, while South Carolina hovers in about 15.5. Blocks per game, the edge is to Auburn's 6 to South Carolina's 3.3 blocks per game. And then when you get to steals, Auburn leads that 7.5 to 4.8. We talked about this matchup during the season, and not a lot has changed as far as the identity of these two teams. You haven't had like new scores emerge or anything like that. I think the only fundamental difference between the two teams between now and then has been the emergence of some of the guys from Auburn's bench because of the injury to Jalen Williams that occurred. Auburn had to find out some different ways to get some things going, different matchups, and so I think Auburn might actually be a better team, which is weird to say in this kind of matchup. But we'll look at the head-to-head a little bit more in detail and slightly differently than we do typically for these games in just a minute. But again, not a lot has changed for these teams. I do wonder what South Carolina has learned, and if you listen to Coach Lamont Paris and the players talk about what they feel like went wrong in the trip to Neville Arena, they'll basically tell you, hey, that's a game that you scrap. I don't know that you really can take much from that game. But we'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a minute. Let's talk about stat leaders for each of the teams. It doesn't change very much for Auburn. Janai Broome is the guy in points, rebounds, and blocks. Trey Donaldson is the assist guy. Steals leader is KD Johnson on the season. When you go over and you look at the South Carolina team, a few things have changed actually for them since the matchup before. Colin Murray-Boyles was not the leader in all of these statistical categories before. He has definitely emerged. He was, he's all freshman team this season, definitely deserved to be up there in the likes of the all freshman team. Meechie Johnson is still the leading scorer for the team. And then Talon Cooper is still the assist leader. As far as how South Carolina gets things done, it's going to be through these guys, and then you add a little flavor of B.J. Mack on there, and you've got what South Carolina likes to do offensively and defensively. So looking forward to seeing how Auburn finds ways to neutralize what is going to be a very motivated South Carolina basketball team coming in. They're a little fresher, right, as far as more recently playing basketball than Auburn. Hopefully Auburn doesn't deal with rust coming into this one, but we will definitely see very soon how that is going to play, whether it's going to play in South Carolina's favor, if they've played basketball more recently, or if they're a little bit more tired because they don't have the extensive bench that Auburn has. But let's get into the betting lines for this game. Again, this is brought to you by BetUS.com, where the game begins. Auburn has a 7 2.5 point spread advantage in this game. So South Carolina coming in, listen, despite the big blowout loss, people are still respecting the South Carolina team as they absolutely should in Vegas. The money line, 320, and the 260 plus 260 money line for South Carolina. About 77 points, just south of 77. So the over-under for Auburn, 76.5. For South Carolina is at 69 with a game over-under of 142. This is a game that, I don't know if I were looking at this game as a bettor. I think South Carolina is going to want to keep this at the under, right? Like they're not going to want to get this game into a shootout. I think that they want to keep Auburn south of 75 points in this game if they absolutely could, and they'd be fine. Really, they want to keep Auburn into the 60s, and really they want to flip those numbers. If they could keep Auburn in the mid 60s and they score around 70 something, I think that'd be kind of game that South Carolina would like to see. But listen, it didn't go that way in the first matchup. Definitely want to get in here and talk about what happened in the first game. And, as an Auburn fan looking at a game like Florida, you say to yourself, like, what can you do, to redeem that game? What do you look at that game and say, hey, what do I take from it? Not very much, right? And so you have to kind of say the same thing if you're a South Carolina fan and you're looking at this game versus Auburn. You say, like, what do you take away from that first game? Thank God we're not inside of Neville Arena, and hopefully their bigs don't shoot 9 3-pointers in this game, right? But this team has been shooting well in Auburn recently, and it seemed as if that South Carolina game was more of an abstraction once you got to the next game versus Kentucky. And then they go on the road to Georgia and they shoot well. They go on the road to Tennessee and they shoot well. They have a game back at home, shoot well, right? Like this Auburn team has continued to shoot the basketball well. South Carolina was just kind of like, it seems now more like the Kentucky game was an abstraction rather than the South Carolina game being the abstraction. If Auburn can keep that shooting momentum going, they're going to be a tough team to be able to be taken out, just because I know that this Auburn team functions off of defense and being able to get into transition. But if they're going to be able to get quality shots in the half court and shoot a high percentage, particularly from three, when we looked at the game itself, Auburn shot 60% from three, which is crazy, right? But they're still in the most recent matchups that I just mentioned, Georgia, Missouri, all of those games, Georgia on the road and then Georgia back at home, Auburn was shooting north of 40% from three in all of those games. So if Auburn's going to continue to shoot the ball at a 40% clip from three, going to be tough for South Carolina to win this game, got to be honest with you. But South Carolina can definitely shoot better than 20% from three, which they did not shoot the ball from three very well in that game. Free throw, Auburn shot almost 86%. I mean, they just couldn't miss, man. 61% from the field, 60% from three, and 86% from the free throw line. Again, South Carolina fans got to say themselves, they're not going to do that again, right? Rebounding edge actually was completely even in this game. I didn't think Auburn rebounded the ball particularly well in that first matchup. Didn't need to rebound the ball a bunch because you're hitting almost everything. But your opportunities were there on the defensive glass, and you didn't do a great job of keeping South Carolina off of the offensive glass. 11 offensive rebounds for South Carolina in that game. The big statistic, I think, that South Carolina, if they're going to turn around and say we have to do better at anything, it's going to be in this last one. Assist to turnover ratio. You're not going to win a basketball game against Auburn only having 5 assists and 13 turnovers and then allowing them to assist on 22 shots and 7 turnovers only. South Carolina is going to have to force Auburn to get into some one-on-one stuff where they're not sharing the basketball quite as well, or they're taking more tough contested shots even if they're assisted baskets. Particularly, they're going to have to run Auburn off of the three-point line if they're starting to show, hey, they're going to come out here and knock down these threes early in this game. But you absolutely, whether Auburn's hitting or not, South Carolina's got to fix the turnover situation. You can't have a 5 to 13 assisted turnover ratio and really hope to be able to be in this basketball game. So that's going to be the biggest thing I think that Coach Parrish is going to stress to his team. It's like, we just need to take care of the basketball. And then on our end of the floor defensively is, listen, we're just going to run them off of the three. South Carolina is not a great shot blocking team. So tough contested threes is probably the better remedy for them. I do wonder if they're going to go to a little bit more of a zone and kind of dare Auburn to shoot themselves out of this game because they don't have the interior defense. But then offensively, I think that they're going to try to do a much better job of just taking care of the basketball. Their spacing wasn't that good. in the first game, and it just allowed Auburn to be a little bit more dangerous. The unfortunate reality for South Carolina is they have to be close to perfect in the way that they want to execute, or Auburn has to fall apart in order for this game to go in their favor, just because the style matchup favors Auburn a little bit more. After going back and rewatching that game, what South Carolina likes to do offensively as far as the inside-out game only is going to work really well if they can do a really good job of getting Janai Broome and Dylan Cartwell in foul trouble. And that's what I think the biggest thing for Auburn is going to be is, can Janai and Dylan can they resist the urge for trying to block everything and really just be solid defensively against Colin Murray Boyles, who is going to come out here really ready to show that he deserves to be on this big stage in front of, this kind of crowd and this really great SEC environment that is in Nashville right now. He's going to want to go out here and show, true freshman or not, this guy Janai Broome is not a better basketball player than me. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how he embraces that matchup here in the post. This is the portion I said was going to be slightly different. Typically what I'll just show you is the opponents of Auburn, kind of how they do traditionally versus what they do in the environment. So if it's a home game for them, then we'll show kind of what their year stuff, what they do on the year versus what they would do at home, and then vice versa for the road. This time I'm actually going to show the Auburn defense in a neutral site. So we've looked at what they look like holistically on the season. What I'm showing is neutral site Auburn defense versus the South Carolina neutral site games this year on offense. And then we'll flip it and we'll talk about the Auburn offense versus the neutral site South Carolina defense. So let's first take a look at what Auburn has done in neutral site games. They're 4-1 so far this season, giving up 69 points per game. I'm sure I will get some comments on that. South Carolina scoring almost 77 points per game. Now, this does include the game that just ended today versus Arkansas. So this includes that game. South Carolina is 4-0. They've only played 4 neutral site games so far this season, but they've won all of them and scored almost 77 points per game in those contests. Shooting 68.4%, Auburn surrendering 74.3% in neutral site games. As far as two-pointers, Auburn's been very stingy in the two-point category, 48.9%. And then South Carolina shooting 62 points. Three-pointers, though, Auburn's actually defended the three fairly well in these neutral site games, or, let some of the talking heads say it, teams just haven't shot the three well versus Auburn in those games. So 26.2% versus the 33.8% that South Carolina is making in those games. Auburn only surrendering 45.5% effective field goal versus 58.3%. South Carolina is built to be efficient offensively. They typically want to have, like, in mid-70s is what they want to score, and they want to make sure that they're utilizing the shot clock and not rushing into shots so that you're not able to really get out and into your run game. They want to be efficient and effective in the half court and really make your defense remain patient, and then find good shots late in the shot clock if they have to, as long as it's a good shot. They want to be patient offensively, and they've done a good job of that on the road. Now, again, they haven't really played a ton of, I won't say difficult games on the road. When we look at their road matchups this season, again, undefeated in it, but they played Virginia Tech, won that game by 2 points versus Vautech on the road. Then they played DePaul on the road, won that game 5 points, and then beat Grand Canyon by 7 points on the road. So, we're not talking about juggernauts that they faced and I keep saying on the road, but at neutral sites. Not talking about juggernauts that they faced in the neutral site game, but they have won all of them. And then, of course, most recently, the Arkansas game, which they won by 14. So the South Carolina team has yet to see a blemish in a neutral site game. We will see what they have in store for Auburn coming up here inside of Bridgestone Arena. When you flip it over to the other side and you talk about the Auburn offense in neutral site games versus this South Carolina defense, you see an Auburn team that is scoring almost 87 points per game in the neutral sites. So doing really well despite, the thought process that Auburn can't play outside of Neville Arena. 4-1 in neutral site games, shooting 75.5% from free throw, 54.1 from 2, and 41.6 from 3. If Auburn continues to shoot this way, in the way that they've done in neutral site games so far this season, against South Carolina. Again, I don't see a path for South Carolina to win giving up this kind of points. 87 points, that's not a South Carolina basketball game, right? Like I just read off all of the neutral site games that they've played so far this season. Their best point output was against Arkansas in this last game, and it was 80. Right. So again, they're going to have to figure out how to slow the game down and get Auburn out of their run game for sure, not giving up the basketball as much, but just forcing Auburn into some tough shots, or just hope Auburn's not hitting. Like maybe they've run out of gas as far as their ability to hit shots. Defensively, South Carolina giving up just south of 70 points per game, and that's really where they want it to be. They want the defensive numbers to hold true for them in these neutral site games, just south of 70. Teams are shooting free throws fairly well, 82% almost, and the twos very well. That number, if I'm a South Carolina fan, I don't like that the South Carolina is surrendering 53.5% from two. Now, you love the three-point number at 28.4. You want Auburn to shoot that, but if Auburn's going to be able to live with, every two trips down the floor, I can go get a bucket in the paint, that's not good because the bigs for Auburn are able to go in and they can make those medium range. When you talk about Janai Broome, Jalen Williams, you talk about Chad Baker-Mazara and his mid-range ability. When you about Chaney Johnson and his ability to shoot from mid-range and get to the rim. Dylan Cardwell shooting very efficient, of course, because he's mostly having layups and dunks on his stuff. Trey Donaldson's doing well in the mid-range. Aiden Holloway's gotten better at his mid-range stuff as the year has progressed. Denver Jones has mostly shot threes and then going all the way to the lane. He hasn't really done a lot of mid-range, but he's pretty good in his mid-range game as well. So, Auburn has become more comfortable at being a three-level basketball team. But if South Carolina is going to allow almost 54% from two, that's not going to be a winning proposition. Again, they can live with this three-point defense that they've had traditionally in these neutral site games. But, I think Auburn will adjust and say, hey, if we're scoring it from two, let's continue to do that, try to get their bigs in foul trouble, because once they go to the bench, they just don't have the depth on the inside to be able to compete. So I think the foul situation is going to really be one that you're going to need to monitor for this game. Who can keep their bigs out of foul trouble? Even though Auburn has a deeper team holistically, there just aren't a lot of shot blocking presence behind Dylan Cardwell, Janai Broome. So if both of those guys are in foul trouble, where do they go in this small ball kind of lineup? You put Jalen Williams at the 5, right? They've got some things that they can do, but it'd be interesting to see if there is foul trouble, what does Auburn do to try to mitigate that? I think the strategy for South Carolina is going to be get Janai Broome in foul trouble, make Dylan Cardwell have to be the primary guy out there on the floor because he's not as big of an offensive threat, and then find a way to continue to attack the rim and make Dylan Cardwell have to be cognizant of his fouls so that he's able to stay on the floor. I think that's the best strategy for them. And then just shoot threes better, right? Like they're an inside-out team. You hear them talk about that. They play their best when they are working through the post with Colin Murray-Boyles, B.J. Mack out there being on the interior. And B.J. Mack actually had a pretty decent game that first game against Auburn. Colin Murray-Boyles had an okay game as well, but I think B.J. Mack was probably the more prolific scorer, particularly in the second half, trying to get the comeback going for him. Meechie Johnson was the guy for them in that game. Like he was really going off in that game, but it pretty much was just those two, and everybody else had a pretty pedestrian game. I think this game being a neutral site game, South Carolina's going to feel a little bit more comfortable in this one, having just won a game last night. They're not going to come in maybe as nervous. The hype around it won't be as big. And they're going to feel, again, they've played this team before, and they don't want to get run off the floor. They're going to be playing with a little bit of a chip. That game did get a little feisty for a little while during that game, particularly Meechie Johnson had some situations going on in that one with some Auburn folks. So going to be interesting to see kind of how that plays out as far as the emotions in this one early in this game, whether or not any of that stuff spills over because of the chip that's going to be coming on the shoulder of the South Carolina players and the supreme confidence that Auburn tends to exude when they hit the floor. So looking forward to seeing how this one matches up. But I want to hear your thoughts on this. You've heard me on about all the statistics and all the things that could happen in this game. Let me hear how you think the thing is going to happen. Whether you're a South Carolina fan and this is your first time tuning in, or you're an Auburn fan and you always do it, I want to hear what you think is going to be the outcome of this game. Give me score predictions down there, and then give me who you think is going to be the high score for each of the teams, right? Let me hear what you guys think about that. I'm going to get out of here. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Make sure you share the content with somebody else. We'll be back at you with a post-game reaction. Win or lose, we're coming right back here to talk about it. Until the next time, and as always, War Eagle.